don't get carried away. I want to thank everybody for attending the 2018 Wendell Whiteman Lecture. This is the 24th iteration of the lecture. This is one of the things that Monmouth has been blessed with over many years, and that we've continued to try to build, is a legacy and a future of distinguished lectureships. We've had several have been established for many years. Some are more recent. I see Gene Robeson out there. There's yet another one who's been added in these last couple of years to add to this series. But the Whiteman Lecture certainly is one of the premier ones that we have during the year. We very much strive for Monmouth College to be a place where important conversations take place, where issues of the day are considered, and to be a place, not in our region, in our state, and indeed in our country, where people say, I wonder what the people at Monmouth think about that. And certainly the Whiteman Lecture contributes to that. As I said, this is the 24th Wendell Whiteman Lecture. The lecture was established several years ago by the sons and family of Mr. Whiteman, and we have some members of the family today. I'd like to recognize and thank those folks who are right here with us. Mr. Whiteman, of course, was a long time an alumnus of the college and a long-time pillar of the community. Worked in Security Savings Bank as a leader there for many years, but was a leader in all aspects of the life of our community. And so thankful to be able to welcome all of you to this event again today. I want to call on another distinguished member of this community to introduce our speaker today. Sarah Ellis is a graduating senior. I think we're pretty safe on saying graduating at this point. Graduating senior. She has been a leader across every aspect of the college's life. My executive assistant, Rhonda Wilhart, would skin me if I did not point out that she had been served as president of Alpha Xi Delta, is a member of the Order of Omega, which is the Greek Life Honor Society on campus, a member of several academic honor societies on campus, a business and accounting major. Yes, Wendy, business and accounting major. But she is just a wonderful example of the young people who come to this college, and young people whose lives are made stronger by the experience of this college, and who go out and make the world a better place because of the experience that they have had here. And Sarah is one of those wonderful seniors who is not worried about what she's going to be doing come August. She is has a great position with Caterpillar and is going to be working in one of Lobie and my favorite cities in the country, San Antonio, Texas. So let me now call on Sarah Ellis to introduce our speaker for today.
Back in the days when the phrase "big man on campus" was popular on the college scene, Dennis Plummer was one of Monmouth's big men on campus, starring as a running back and kick returner on the Fighting Scots undefeated football team of 1972. After that historic season, he was named MVP of the team and received the program's coveted McClintock Award. As of today, Dennis is once again the big man on campus, joining a list of other prestigious businessmen and women who have presented Monmouth's annual Whiteman Lecture since the series began in 1992. During his time at Monmouth, he majored in business and economics and was involved in football, baseball, and fraternity life. During his 28-year career with Monsanto, those moves helped his organization grow from a Midwestern ag company into an international agribusiness giant. When he started in 1980, Monsanto generated $300 million in annual revenue. Today, that figure is approximately $14 billion. For part of his career, Dennis was president of American Seeds Incorporated, a wholly owned subsidiary of Monsanto. His other positions with the company included chief of staff to the CEO, managing director of the U.S. Crop Protection, and director of biotechnology licensing for South America. However, as we will soon learn from his talk, his industry is changing and more moves are required to stay ahead. Today, Dennis is co-founder and executive vice president of Arvogenics, LLC, which is developing the oilseed field pennycress, a crop that grows after corn in the fall and produces oils with properties desirable for fuel. He is also a consultant for ag tech startups and was an adjunct faculty member at the St. Louis University School of Business, where he earned his MBA. Dennis has also been serving his alma mater since 2011, helping create opportunities for current and future generations of students as a member of the Monmouth College Board of Trustees. Please join me in welcoming our 2018 Whiteman Lecturer, Mr. Dennis Plummer.
She made that introduction, big man on campus. If one of my best critics is my 29-year-old daughter, she would have edited that right out of your script in that introduction. Anyway, thanks for the invitation, and thanks to John Osterlin, Dwayne Bonifer, Kate Shipp. They kind of helped me kind of get all squared away for this visit. I really appreciate that the college and everyone here had me come back. So I'm looking forward to having an exchange. I just wanted to know a little bit about the audience. I know we have students here. I know we have some faculty here. Do we have any producers, any farmers in here by any chance? Excellent, good. So I was kind of, by the way, business or science? Some of both? Business majors, science majors, some of both? Okay, good. Fits perfect with what I prepared. I'm glad we have that kind of audience. Anyway, just a little bit about me. I grew up in eastern Iowa. My family we had a little farm, but we rented it out. We had a country grain elevator that my grandfather and the banker built, and my dad ran it for all those years. And then we eventually went to Muscatine, where my dad got affiliated with Kent Feeds. That's where I graduated from high school. And in eastern Iowa, there was a retired Presbyterian minister, Ralph and some people would know Doc Blick. He went here many years ago, and he recruited, in his spare time, he was retired, and he went up and down eastern Iowa recruiting students, especially athletes. He just was nonstop. He'd come to my high school every month for a year and get us to come over here and visit, and that's one of the reasons. And when I did come over here, at his encouragement, I was very impressed and had really liked the place, and it's one of the great four-year experiences of my life. So anyway, it was a great place for me. We had great students and great faculty, so I really enjoyed it. So I got a few slides here today. So when they asked me to do this, I went downstairs in my basement, and I got the bucket, with all my Monmouth College stuff in it, and I went to, do you still do a Ravelings yearbook? Still do that? No yearbooks here? Well, in those days, we had a yearbook every year, and it would do a review. You probably had one in high school anyway, but anyway, we had one called Ravelings, and I pulled that page out because it was fairly typical, and I kind of scanned it because there were a lot of interesting things going on in 1969 when I got out of high school, 1970 when I started college. And it was, there was a lot of stuff that happened. I mean, we went to the moon, and then we almost had that was either Apollo 11 or 12, and Apollo 13 almost crashed and made a movie out of it. We didn't know if those guys were going to get back. There were a lot of other things. Not only were we just in Vietnam, we decided to go into Cambodia, then there were riots, and then we didn't. Anyway, just a lot of things. You can read that chart up there. It was a kind of a tumultuous time. So I pulled that page out because these are people, students I went with, either standing downtown on the square or on campus, and that kind of permeated the Ravelings yearbook that way. It's just time, and I got to be honest, when we would go to sit around and talk, we would talk about everything on that list. It was a very interesting time in history, I think, except for those last two things. It was EPA started and World Trade Center was finished. I don't remember ever talking about those. Those became quite famous later on. But anyway, that was the kind of year my freshman year was. Then I had to do this. Things calmed down, and by senior year, we had, I think as some of you know, we had, in my 4 years, freshmen couldn't play, but it was 7-1-1. Then we went 8-1, 8-1. We couldn't beat St. Olaf. And then we went 9-0 my senior year. We beat them in the mud. I think that was the last game of the season. Anyway, that's me, number 31. And I picked that photo out because I had a box of clippings. Chuck Potler. I played with him. He's the guy leading the block, and I played with his other brother, who was 2 years older than me. Chuck was 2 years younger than me. I played with both of them. They became some of the largest and most successful John Deere dealers in the state of eastern Iowa, if any of you know them. Anyway, they're quite successful, and their father and my father were friends, and I pulled that out because that kind of led my, if you're really good at some things, those are going to work for you, and I'll tell you in a minute how that kind of worked, helped me work my way into a job, actually. So the topic today, you've seen all the statistics. I won't run through it, but we're on our way to 10 billion people. I can remember when there were 6 billion people in my lifetime, and we're going to be 10 billion before long. Food and agriculture is just a really big part of the economy of the U.S. and even more so in other countries. To feed those 10 billion people, we've had a lot of productivity and technological improvements and increases. I'm going to talk a little bit about some of the things that got us here and what we're going to have to do in the future. So the good thing that I'll talk about later on in the presentation is ag was kind of a sleepy thing for a lot of years. Monsanto made it a little less sleepy, but it's really attracting not only a lot of technological innovation, but investment. There's a lot of money that's now very interested in what can be done in ag and tech. These are some of the things that she talked about that I did. After I graduated, I wasn't sure, I didn't even have a resume written, and I just lived in I rented a room just down the street, one block from a guy I knew, and I got a call from a guy over at Butler Manufacturing in Galesburg. This was like 2 days after graduation. Didn't have a resume yet. And it was a guy that went to Monmouth College. He was kind of a big deal over there. He was the second or third guy at Butler. They needed somebody, and he just called the college and said, I like that guy Plummer. He's a pretty good football player. Is he around? And somebody from the college called me. I called him, went over there, and he hired me. And then I worked there for a while, and that's just how, it helps to have connections and to be good at something that somebody notices. It's just the way the world works. I worked there not that long, and then the dog food company in town, Wells, it was owned by National Can at the time. Adrian Wells had something to do with it, so he called me one day, and he wanted me to come over because they had a similar job, and it was a little bigger place at the time, so I took that job, worked there for a year. They transferred me to California for a year or two. I came back, and then it was about to be sold. I think there's different ownership. They were about to be sold to Jim Dandy, and I thought, I don't know if I'm going to go to Birmingham, Alabama if I wanted to, so I got a job with Pfizer in St. Louis. So that, in 1978, I moved to St. Louis, and I didn't even work for Pfizer very long. The Monsanto people met me, and they offered me a job in town. Then I worked there 28 years. So I'm going to talk mostly about Monsanto and what I've done since then, because it's been a really great ride over there. I do want to tell you one little anecdote while I'm on this slide. When I was fairly junior at Monsanto, at the time I was in charge of communications and advertising for our selective herbicides. It was kind of a small family, and they brought this guy in from Europe. They wanted to train the Europeans to learn a little bit more about headquarters, and this guy was the biggest nerd in the world, and he looked a lot like Bill Gates. And he talked a lot like Bill Gates, except he was Flemish, and he had a very heavy accent. And so I took a liking to this guy, and they told me, you should work with him because he's going to be kind of product management for the minor products. And anyway, I took a liking to this guy, spent a lot of time with him, and developed a very close relationship, helped him learn how the U.S. worked, and helped him get rid of his accent and all kinds of things. And then about 2 years later, a very similar thing. I was in I was in charge of new product development, kind of like the job that this fellow I was telling you about. Anyway, another guy came in from this time from Scotland. They did the same thing. They said, help this guy out. He's never been to the U.S., doesn't know anything about Monsanto, so forth and so on. Anyway, I'll just fast forward through that. I made friends with those guys when we were all in our 30s, early 30s perhaps, And about 15 years later, it worked out pretty good because the first guy, the Flemish Belgian from Europe, he ended up being the first CEO of the new Monsanto, and he hired me to be his chief of staff. And then the CEO that followed him was Hugh Grant, who's still currently the CEO of Monsanto. He was a great personal friend, still is, and he kept me on to be his chief of staff for a while, and then he let me take on a couple jobs. You see later on that they said, put me back on the field. I got to get out of headquarters and do something operational. Anyway, it's something to remember. Make friends in all kinds of places. They'll be very good for you later on. So I did for 28, and I'll talk a little bit about Monsanto, but in particular, the last about 10 years that I've been gone from Monsanto. I met my wife there. She still works there, so we still got Monsanto coming in every day. But I'll talk a little bit about Arbogenics, a startup that I'm very proud of and excited about. I'll do this real quick. Monsanto's historically a big chemical company. It started out in the back of a drugstore with a guy that was a pretty good chemist and did all kinds of things, and eventually started building big commodity chemicals. They ended up kind of by accident getting into herbicides and had a couple good ones. But these were called selective herbicides, and you'd try to get a herbicide that would kill weeds but not kill the crops. So that was kind of a tricky, you could find things to kill grasses or broadleaf weeds usually, and then you'd try to get them to not kill the crops. But it was a very big business. Monsanto was okay at it, and that was a beginning of Monsanto and how it got into ag. And so then when you go over there to the right side of that page, the guys doing this synthesis and testing, they came across this thing called Roundup. So I'm going to talk about Roundup on the next slide. It was really something that transformed the company, and Monsanto actually fairly early on in its life got rid of, doing discovery work, synthesizing compounds to find that activity was pretty hard, and went full into biotechnology and genomics. And so here's what happened, and this is I had a pleasure of being part of this. So I mentioned Roundup. Now, Roundup has a problem. Roundup kills everything, right? So it was never a very big product, a specialty. You either had to use it at the beginning of the year before you planted crops, or at the end of the year if you might have perennials, but you didn't really have too much time. So it was really specialty. You probably all use it in your yards. Everybody's used Roundup, but it kills everything, right? So that's a problem with crops. Until this biotech team they formed in 1982 got very curious, and one guy in particular, Rob Fraley, he's still chief science officer, he said, well, what if we could make plants resistant to Roundup? Well, that'd be great. So instead of doing a few acres, well, and long story short, figured out how to do it. Transgenic. So now they got it done on soybeans, they got it done on corn. So now you're talking about, instead of just specialty uses, you now have 80 million acres of corn you can use it. You now have 80 million acres of soybean you can use it on, 10 to 15 million cotton, 10 to 15 million acres of canola, alfalfa, and so forth. That's pretty much the crops. They got a few more now. So instead of a niche product that was worth, maybe, $100 million in revenue, suddenly you had many billions of dollars. And by the way, it wasn't just Roundup, so the resistance to the trait would be sold, and it was worth as much as this. You had better margins on the trait that would either be licensed or sold. So that was phenomenal. So that was several billions of dollars of growth real fast in a period of about 5 or 10 years. It was fun doing that because I was head of the U.S. and launched all those things. Did the same thing for those insect traits. By the way, they got different names now, but this was explosive growth, 30-40% a year for about a 10 or 12-year period. The other thing Monsanto did was start acquiring seed companies. So DeKalb, Asgrow, and Delta Pine, those were the either number 1 or 2 in those big crops. And I won't go through the rest. They bought a lot of seed companies because seed was the delivery for either better genetics, which I haven't talked too much about, or these herbicide and insecticidal traits. And Monsanto was first at all of this stuff. Others have come in and done pretty good with other things, but this was a company that grew, just like $1 billion a year for the 5 or 6 years when we launched that stuff. So anyway, that was quite a ride. Monsanto had its own, as I mentioned, we started out as a very small company, and suddenly we were huge, and we didn't know how to, not only did we spend more in R&D, but we started acquired a pharmaceutical company, acquired a food company, those things. Eventually, we spun out that traditional Monsanto. It became Solutia. It's now owned by Eastman. And then we were just pharma and ag. Anyway, eventually, kind of getting through that, we were spun off on our own because when Pharmacia ended up buying us, wanting the pharmaceutical part of Monsanto, they didn't understand, didn't know, didn't want the ag part of it and some of the legacy issues that went through it, which were actually Monsanto, not the ag part. But anyway, they had us IPO. That's when I was working for Hendrik Verify, the first CEO. We did that in about 2003 at $10. And I made this slide up over the weekend. It was $117, but maybe some of you noticed the Justice Department approved the Bayer-Monsanto merger, so the stock jumped to 125 yesterday because of the transaction price. Bayer is buying Monsanto for $128, so it's finally right where it should be. The industry has consolidated a lot, and I know sometimes with, especially the producers, there's some concerns about that. 4 companies, now that Monsanto and Bayer are getting together, DuPont and Dow did last year, and a Chinese company bought Syngenta that used to be Novartis, that used to be Ciba-Geigy. So there's been a lot of consolidation. Some industries do it, this one's had a lot. BASF is the other company. So you got 4 companies that have a tremendous amount of the technology for the industry. And some people are concerned about that. But I just want to share with you, that's all changing. These 4 companies, they're going to have big pathways into the market. They own a lot of assets, and they have market power, perhaps, in going to it. But I've learned in this startup industry I've been working in for 10 years, the investment bankers have told us that in pharmaceutical, they've really backed off their R&D programs, and 80% of what they get, they license in from universities and startups. 80% of pharmaceuticals do not come out of those big 5 or 6 pharmaceutical companies. The same thing is actually happening here. It's hard to be nimble and quick and innovative when you're a big company like those big 4. There are other things that are complementary, and there are some natural efficiencies that come together by being big. But I want to talk a little bit about this startup in ag and food tech, because it's going to change a bunch of things. Now, on this page are the categories, the people that are looking at it. I'm not going to go through them. I'm just going to let you look at it. I'm familiar with the yellow ones a little bit more than the downstream ones, but there are, I'm going to share with you just a few examples. There are literally hundreds and hundreds of companies very active in innovation, inventions, and starting up businesses in all of those categories. 10 years ago, it was pretty close to nothing. And that's because there's so much to do, and you can be very clever. And this is stuff the big companies don't actually do that well. They do what they do, but the big companies view this as great. This is now their R&D pipeline. So there's going to be lots of opportunities. Just to share with you a little bit about numbers, the slide doesn't back up, but it was essentially 0 10 years ago that this is seed money and venture capital that goes into ag tech startup companies. It was virtually 0, and now we're up to $10 billion last year investing in companies like the one I'm going to tell you a little bit about. That's not nothing, and I have a really good example, because you wonder, well, who are they and where are they? So here are the top 20, and I don't know too much about a bunch of these companies, but I know a little bit about one. And at Farmers Business Network, and I just didn't realize till last night that they're actually there in 2 places. Farmers Business Network, $110 million of funding for that company, and then they're down there below 40, and that's just 1 year, so they raised $150 million last year in venture money, mostly out of Silicon Valley, because Kleiner Perkins was the lead investor on that, a big Palo Alto investor. And in Now, this is a practical matter. Do you know where this company was founded, Farmers Business Network? Monmouth, Illinois. It started here. Now, the guy that kind of had the initial thought was a buddy of mine from Monsanto, and he called me up one day. He said, Plummer, you're doing your thing, but I got this other idea. How should I work with it? And I talked to him about it and said, what do you want to do? And it had something to do with, yields and integrating data from, it's kind of one of those big data plays, but he didn't know how to do any of it. He said, how do I start? And I said, well, I don't know, but I know a guy that knows quite a bit about that stuff because he did a bunch of planter population things and studies on yields and using data to do that. Sam's here today, a guy named Sam Stelling, who ran Monmouth Research Farm, who I knew. So I hooked those two guys up, and then Sam got Chris Fasano and a couple other guys around town working on it, and they got it off the ground. Now, the company, this original guy, this buddy of mine, Mark, in St. Louis, one thing he did right, he knew these Kleiner Perkins people somehow. He'd seen them come into Monsanto. He talked to them. Anyway, long story short, they bought this company, and they turned it into Farmers Business Network. Is considered one of the biggest ag tech companies. They call it a unicorn, unicorns in Silicon Valley. That's something worth $1 billion has been deemed to be a unicorn. So anyway, some of these guys sitting in the room had a lot to helping that thing get off the ground. Now it's a lot different. They're turning into kind of an Amazon, eBay of farm, hooking everything up. But that's interesting. I just say that these things can start anywhere, including Monmouth, Illinois, and one of the great big ones did it. I want to talk a little bit about that, because I faced this when I was a startup at Arvigenics. Do I need cash? Do I need expertise? Do I need training? Yeah, I needed all that. And I want to talk about, if you're in that place, an accelerator. If you're not familiar with that term, that's people that come in at an early stage, and they will bring you some money to get started. They will bring you some expertise on how to get things going, and they will make connections for you. I just want to talk about one that was really helpful to me. Whoops. I was kind of talking over that slide. So anyway, there's one in St. Louis that was founded by some guys from Anheuser-Busch, Bunge, one of the Danforths, and a Monsanto guy. And so an accelerator, there's one called Ag Lab, and I was real proud because their first employee was my son. And they invested in us when we were trying to get it off the ground, and then I invested in Yield Lab, so these things work that way. So an accelerator, if those of you ever get this going, there's accelerators everywhere, but there are a lot. There's dozens that used to not exist 10 years ago, especially in this space. So they will do training, they will do mentoring, they will do connecting. They put on a program for us every month, and they really helped us, both in money and expertise. They were even named, I think, Accelerator of the Year by that Ag Funder out of California that keeps track of that stuff. And I want to just talk about some of the things they've invested in. Now, over in the lower left, you see Arvigenics. That's a company. I'll tell you about it just in a little bit. I don't have time to talk about all of those things, but those were companies that didn't exist 4 years ago. And there's, in St. Louis, you've got, between Monsanto and Danforth, WashU, institutions, you got a lot of ag expertise there at the universities and in industry, so it's really taken off. These people have all, some of them are St. Louis, but a lot of them are out of town that came to St. Louis to get involved in the expertise, get in one of our, incubators, get involved with investors and so forth. You got one of them I was telling somebody about, this AgriPoint. They do perennial crops in Florida. They have vehicles and actually drones that fly in between the trees and down the rows, especially citrus and some vegetable crops. The perennial crops is their specialty. And they treat, if something needs a fungicide or something, they only treat the trees and areas of the trees that need it. They know whether they can tell, they have sensing devices that can sense stress. They only water the trees that need it and stop water for those that don't. They do some amazing things. I could go on, but that's a very interesting company. They have one that now has these mini nitrogen producers you could put on farms and dealers instead of these big plants. You've got a company, Cryosite's one of those that I'm familiar with. Been in classes with those guys. They figured out how to make fish farming much more efficient. They harvest eggs and they can keep these ponds going year round. They freeze, and so they can do crops of fish in a cycle that's pretty interesting. And of course, a bunch of RNAi silencing technology and how to produce it. That stuff's going on in town. It's very exciting. None of this 10 years ago would have existed. It's way too much for the big companies and a lot of stuff that the little ones are able to do. And let me talk just very quickly about Arvogenics. This is a company that I was a co-founder with a couple of buddies. We got this started. It's pennycress. It actually started out of USDA in Peoria. They do alternative crops research. This is one they really liked, and then they look around for commercial companies to take it and go with it. We took it and we went with it. And it was good because we had enough. It was largely a breeding operation. It's a crop. You actually fly it over corn in the fall. It looks like there in the upper left-hand corner, in the winter, and then you harvest it in the spring. And you got to harvest it in time. It's a double crop, so you can get your soybeans planted. It comes right out of the ground early. That picture on the upper right, that's kind of what it looks like right now. Some of the fields between here and St. Louis that we've got, it looks like that. It will bolt, seed, set its seed, and we'll be able to harvest that in late May. The pennycress is an oil seed. It's a very close cousin to canola. And so you crush it, you squeeze the oil out, you feed the press cake to animals. We had a couple issues that we didn't anticipate, but this is the life in startups. The biodiesel is not quite as interesting as it was when we opened it up, although it's still an okay market. The animal feed, because of DDGs, there's so much corn, used for ethanol, the DDG market, cattle do really good on it, so those prices were depressed. We have a great R&D team and not a lot of people on it, and we outsource some of it to universities. But we had to do a couple things. We had to the oil was ideal for biodiesel and jet fuel, but human food oil, the food grade oil is a higher price, like 20 or 30% higher. That makes all the difference in the world. So all we had to do is take, if there's any chemists, we had a long chain fatty acid, erucic acid, C22, that long chain. We use gene editing. You do gene editing here. I don't know, that's really transformed biology. And we were able to take that long chain out. We now have a food grade oil that's as good as canola and even has lower saturated fat. So we've got a really good oil in our crop. And of course, and the other thing, the reason we had to feed cattle instead of chickens and hogs you get a better price because we had too much fiber. We've now found mutants and we've edited out the genes that produce a lot of the fiber, so we've lowered our fiber. So now our fiber price. So our investors are very happy. We solved our compositional issues with modern tools in chemistry and biology that we could never have done even 5 years ago. So anyway, that's kind of fast forwarding through that. We had, like most startups, the founders start out with their own money out of their own pocket. We got institutional investors in there. Those are all St. Louis except for one. And then, of course, Monsanto loved this thing. Monsanto is our lead investor. It fits right in their portfolio. So they invested the largest amount of money in Series A, and they're chairman of our board. It's great. They would love to see this thing succeed. It's good to have that. So, and the other thing is a lot of former Monsanto people work at the company. Most of us we're either really young or we're really old. The really young ones can work for a little bit of money. They don't demand big salaries, but they'll take equity. And then all the senior people kind of already did their thing, don't need their salary, and they're working 100% for equity, and the investors like that because now you have a low burn rate, you don't have big salary burn every month, and you got people who are willing to work for equity, so everybody wins if you, but that's, somebody with 5 kids, 30, 40 years old, maybe that doesn't fit so well, but we've been able to really staff this thing with some amazing people. You know, I won't talk too much about this just in the interest of time, but there's some pretty exciting stuff going on in ag and food tech. You can see those up there. You know, vertical farms. I mentioned robotics. Robotics is doing everything. I kind of even touched on big data, but big data is really going to make it more efficient and help grow yields. There's a company called, one of the companies we've invested in is Memphis Meats down in Memphis, and they're actually growing meat quite successful, you know, without having to grow the animals. It's actually the animal. There's quite a bit of technology going on there. There's big money out of California interested in that one. Gene editing is a huge deal. I don't know if you do that on campus here yet, but I think you will be. Probiotics, biologicals, that's a new one. Those are actually plant compounds that you make more of so the plant can either do more of what it does or protect it against things it doesn't like. What else have we got? Oh yeah, we're talking about just even the in-home stuff, you know, things like recyclers or those smart refrigerators. Have you guys seen at the trade shows some of these smart refrigerators? Is that pretty amazing or what? I mean, you know, you can, it'll tell you what to order, so you don't have 2 or 3 of something and not enough of something else. You can, cameras inside the fridge, it's sending you messages, or you won't even have to ask. It'll know when the milk is low and it'll have it delivered to. Anyway, those things, they're available now. It's just a matter of when do we adapt to that stuff. All that stuff is going on, some of it in St. Louis, California, and other places too. So if you get into one of these things, because at least the students in here, and maybe some of you are inventors with business ideas. You usually, when we started my company, the 2 founders, and we hired somebody pretty early on, there were 4 of us, we borrowed some incubator space. This is right across the street from where we started. Our room wasn't quite as nice, and we couldn't always get it. When we couldn't get that, we were working out of my house. My favorite program is Silicon Valley, so it was a little bit like Silicon Valley. You guys watch that? So we'd just hang around my house all day, and sometimes at night, my wife would come home, and there'd be 4 of us working on stuff. But it was a lot of fun. That's what you got. Startups are pretty good for a lot of people because work style and flexibility, you know, in your life, it's a little different than working for a big corporation. So anyway, that's kind of a fast through for what I've been able to participate in, and I really liked it. Sometimes, a couple years ago, one of the ag fraternities asked me to, you know, give some career advice for students. I'll go through this pretty quick, but here's my graduation speech. You know, get something that fits. Get something that fits you. Make sure it's something you like going to work every day to do. Get a lot of experiences early in your career. I kind of did that more by accident than by design, but it really helped me out, and not only in experiences, but the people I got to know. I always took an interest in the scientists. I spent a lot of time with scientists whenever I could. It served me well. Science majors, learn about business. You'll be able to invent better things that are relevant and make sense, and you'll get there a lot sooner. Never stop educating yourself. Foreign language helps a lot. I had to go back to school to learn Spanish. Get better at it, be world-class at something. I can't overemphasize enough, it doesn't matter what you're doing. If you have good communication skills, build interpersonal relationships, you know, make friends with the right people, just make lots of friends, be easy to work with, be productive with every team you're on, never shirk any duties, volunteer for a lot of stuff, have those good relationship things. It works a couple ways. Anyway, a little bit about leadership, and do what you can. Spend some time figuring out whether you want to work for a big corporation or a startup. You may want to do both. In my case, I did both. It kind of worked out timing-wise for me. I think the startups are probably, like I said, it's really good for early in your career is really good, late in your career, in the middle, maybe not so much, but I hope it gets better, and we need, at least in the community I'm familiar with, St. Louis, where we've got several hundred startups now in food and ag tech. It's too much. Old people, actually. We need more young people in those things, and so anyway, we hope some of you could take an interest in that and make it your career path. So anyway, I went through that in a hurry, but I like audiences to not get too spending too much time. So anyway, I would like to take a few minutes to take any questions, field any queries that you may have. You can't leave yet. I'm just joking. Well, they take actual, I'm not a scientist in that area. They take the animals and they put it in a media with some kind of stimulant, and it keeps it growing. So you have to, I'm sure they're refreshing it, but they are growing meat at fairly rapid levels. It's actual meat. It's reproducing cells. So there might be somebody in this room knows a little bit more about it, but they are getting a lot of excitement around that. I think they've kind of cracked the nut. I'm sure, like any other startup, they probably are going to have more problems and have things that need to get fixed, but it's, from what I understand is, it's meat. It tastes the same, and if it's not ready in a year or two, within 5 years, I think, 5 or 6 years, it's part of what we'll be doing.
You mentioned you kind of got into this business almost on accident. You kind of got lucky through an alumni connection. How did you know once you were in this business that it was like something you wanted to continue doing and something that you really enjoyed?
You talking about Monsanto or the Arvogenics business?
Monsanto, yeah.
Oh, Monsanto? It fit me okay. I kind of knew the ag business. I liked the people. I was familiar with at the time it was herbicides. Like I say, my family, we grew up, I used to run spreaders and, nurse tanks and so forth, so I was kind of familiar with what they were doing. And so the culture and the product fit me. Now, I will say this, we transformed ourselves dramatically. We got out of those businesses and got into all new ones, and I kind of liked that. So it's just something that fit, and I was excited every day to go to work. And when you're excited to go to work every day, you're going to do pretty good. So it wasn't anything magical. It wasn't even anything I planned. It just it fit me, and I got lucky fairly early in my career.
So you already had the business background from college, but how do you find yourself adjusting to the new science aspect of your position?
Yeah, I was an econ and business major, and if I heard you right, was I able to adjust? Yeah, I'm not a scientist, but I stayed current enough. What I did was made friends with many scientists who could tell me, kind of dumb it down and tell me what they could or couldn't do, and you got to listen and figure it out. And in a big company, I'll tell you right now, the big company is really hard. That's why they're having a struggle with their pipeline, because the scientists are in a big center out there 10 miles away from the office where all the business and marketing people are. In a startup, and even Arvogenics, I was there a couple days ago, we got 3 or 4 scientists sitting there with 3 or 4 business people. It's an immediate, how can we do this? What can we do about fiber? What can we do about erucic oil? And they'll start talking about, well, because we're a 95% overlap with Arabidopsis. Maybe you do that work with Arabidopsis here. We already know what the genes are responsible for, and then we talk about, could you edit that damn gene out that's transporting the glucosinolate into the seed, because the cattle don't like the taste of that? And yeah, we can. So that would never take place at Monsanto, but it happens in a startup because the scientists and business people are all right together. So I couldn't do that, although I did learn how to breed crops. I did the actual first crosses on the crop. That wasn't that complicated, but I had a plant breeder come, actually a guy that's really good at it from Western Illinois University. He came down, showed us how to do it, and I got all of our first crosses done. So sometimes you just have to go in the lab and do the work yourself. That's what's fun about a startup. You can do everything.
I'm curious, you were with Monsanto through a period of time when you hit a home run with the development of Roundup, and I'm guessing the company's nearly ecstatic, and not too much later you found you were the demons of much of the world. I'm curious as the corporate reaction to that, and I assume they were surprised by it, and what they initially did to try and counteract it, or if I'm assuming they were pretty well blindsided. I'm just, your thoughts on that.
Yeah, on which one you're, because we had several demons. Which one were you talking about? You mean the anti-GMO? It's either dioxin or anti-GMO or transgenics or, or Roundup causes cancer. It's one of those 3 or 4. I just didn't know which one. When you're a big company, Facebook's getting grilled today, when you have a lot of success, you're going to have some people challenge you because you can grow real fast, and maybe you grow faster than you should, and sometimes you don't always anticipate the things you should. I see Facebook as a good example. They weren't smart, and as smart as they weren't smart enough to realize people would take that stuff and do bad things with it. We didn't know, since our inventions were so great, we didn't know people were going to have problems with some of these things. We thought they'd love it. Not everybody loved it. They don't believe in transgenic, for example. What's another one? Oh yeah, the Roundup causes cancer. Well, I'm not sure. There actually were a couple clusters, but those could have been maybe not even related to Roundup. Sometimes it's hard to get to the answer to those, but yeah, when you're a big company, I don't know, was there another demon, or was it you just talking about Bayer taking over?
Well, I guess initially I was thinking of Roundup, where the farmers grasped this as just a tremendous boon of weed control, and then then we morphed into the anti-GMO.
Yeah.
Take it to the food. There's foods being labeled as non-GMO that there's no possible way they ever could have been GMO, and it's all Monsanto's fault.
There's a lot of cheating on organics and non-GMO. I agree. People just had some fundamental problems with GMO. Just didn't think you should be doing that, taking a gene from one organism, putting it into another. And I don't think there's anything to do to change their mind. I will say this, all those original Roundup Ready, and that was a single gene, and then 2 or 3 genes in the insect side. Those Roundup's gone on probably way more than 1 billion acres over the last 15 years, and there are really no health incidents. There's nothing anywhere ever that has been a health issue. Even the antis have kind of run out of steam on that. So they just have more or less principled arguments about, we just don't think we should be doing that. And you just have to agree to disagree on stuff like that, and as long as it's not harmful and it's not adverse to, in fact, it's beneficial to the environment, then you let the customers decide. They vote every day. All right, got a professor.
Could you speak a little bit about pennycress? And you got it in little farms here and there. How do you get to a scale that makes it profitable and places handle it? Or what are the distribution problems, and how do you get big enough to saturate the market? Yeah, well, in our case, that is an issue.
We're largely in R&D getting our seed composition, fiber down, get the fatty acid profile right, get the glucosinolates. That's kind of a thing that makes it. Cruciferous vegetables have it. That's why they don't taste so good sometimes. So we're getting that done through advanced science, but we're still a breeding play, crossing, using genomics to identify the best parents, the best males and females to cross, all that stuff. But the next phase is going to be as difficult once we start scaling up. Right now we're just in plots, replicated yield trials and so forth. We do some fields, but not lots of fields, because we still don't have the product we're ready to go to market with. We hope it will come in our spring replicated yield trials coming up in a few years. Our biggest problem, there's going to be a farmer adoption issue. There were in every product I talk about, so I think we'll do that. We'll try to do it faster versus slower, but if the product is a good cover crop and they can harvest it and make a profit on it, and it's in time to do the soybeans, that will all work out. Our problem is actually the processing. There's only 3 processed, ADM, Bunge, Cargill, and Dreyfus internationally. They're called ABCD in our industry, ADM, Bunge, Cargill. we need one of those to start processing this crop, squeezing the oil out, so forth. They're kind of the opinion, well, let us know when you get to a couple million acres and we'll build you a plant. Well, the problem is you can't go from 0 to 1 million, right? You need to start out with 10,000 acres, then maybe 100,000 acres. That is actually our problem. We're having a lot of conversations with ADM, Bunge, and Cargill to see which one of them wants to run with it. So that's really all you can do is cut them a deal that says here's what you'll get, and you might have to give some disproportionate profits to them in their early years so they're willing to build or probably modify a facility to do the processing and crushing. But there's got to be enough margin in there to make that work. So interesting negotiations. All right, one more. I think we about ready to wrap up? Okay.
As an environmental major, I'm really interested in the sustainability of agriculture and considering future generations, not only of crops, but of people. I know when you were talking about pennycress, you guys, you said you can lay it on corn and it'll be ready for harvest in May before soy. But if we consider that climate change is real and the growing seasons are changing, how are you guys addressing that issue?
Sorry, how are we addressing?
The issue of, well, you have to rely on a consistent growing season, but the growing seasons are changing.
Yeah, so I didn't give you the full pitch like I do to investors. So about in any part of the Midwest, we should be leaving crop residue or planting cover crops over winter, so you don't have the loss of soil, loss of nitrogen. We are a nitrogen scavenger, so you plant us, we want to leave the corn, and we want to grow because we're growing up out of the corn because we flew it over. We're a nitrogen scavenger, and you'll get essentially zero with a cover crop on corn stalks. You'll get essentially zero erosion. We have a great environmental story, and then when you harvest it, you can plant soybeans right into it, no-till is what they're doing. So we can perpetuate continuous cover on the soil over that rotation, because right now, for the foreseeable future, it's corn and soybeans. You get pennycress in between it, corn, pennycress, soybeans, corn, pennycress, soybeans. Tremendous environmental benefits, and farmers know it too. Farmers out there, there's some benefits to that. And you get that extra revenue off that cover crop that's grown in between over winter. I don't know if I answered your question, but was I close enough? Okay, all right. Okay, well, listen, we'll wrap it up. Thanks a lot.
Thank you. Thanks, Dennis. And don't run off. As a memento of being with us and being the Whiteman Lecture for this year, and as an expression of appreciation, we want to present you with the Scotsman stanchion. One more to add to your trophy case. And
Excellent.
And I think Jeff
Well,
would like to
thank you.
we'd like to get the grip and grin here.
Thank you.
Thank you, Dennis. Thanks again to Dennis. Thanks again to the Whiteman family, especially for making this possible. To all the members of the staff who worked to bring Dennis here today, and thank all of you for attending. So, have a good day.